Good evening. This is Ken Long at Tortoise Capital with some additional thoughts on strategic thinking and systems thinking. We think of strategy as the connector, as the first step in the process between connecting our purposes and goals with the outcomes that we desire. We think of strategy as the broad top down vision of what it is that we want to do to achieve those goals. We turn those into operational thinking when we have specific processes, projects, steps in the approach, and then tactics are the execution of each of those specific techniques or projects. Strategy is associated with three different problem-solving models, and which one we choose really is a function of how much chaos and complexity we see in the world. I'll start over on the right-hand side, the routine application of standard operating procedures, tactics, and procedures. That's what we do when we know what to do, when the task is clear and it's a simple application of known behaviors. We just do it. If it's not clear which is the appropriate SOP or the tactic to apply, the next level of complexity up is the rational analytical decision-making model, and that's where we formulate a particular problem statement. We identify some courses of action that allow us to achieve our outcomes in one of several ways. We evaluate those courses of action against certain criteria that reflect our values, and then based on how that analysis works out, we favor one course of action over another. So it's a very rational economic model. Sometimes, however, chaos and complexity is too great, and we're not able to so easily define the problem and evaluate criteria in precise terms, or have a mechanism by which we may weigh and compare these courses of action. And so we move up to the most flexible form of problem solving called design thinking. Normally the output of that is a narrative and a sketch. The sketch is a visual representation of how we are approaching chaos and complexity and turning it into something that we can grasp, something that we can handle. And the narrative would be the textual description of that sketch and of our understanding. And when we think of design thinking, we're really looking at a broad, top-down heuristic approach to describing the complexity to get it under somewhat of control. And it would be normal in those kinds of circumstances to start with something that was very complex and chaotic, apply some design thinking to it to the point where it was stable enough or defined enough or semi-structured whereby we could apply a rational analytical decision-making model on our newfound understanding, and then turn that into a sequenced order of this routine application of SOPs. So when we think about chaos and complexity then, and design thinking, and this is really what we look at when we look at the stock market and commodities market and currency markets, we have something that goes beyond our ability to simply use rational analytical economic thinking. And the three ideas really are problem finding, problem framing, and problem solving. So problem solving is what you do after you've found something that seems to be worth working on, and then problem framing, in which you structure that problem in a certain way so that you can begin to apply strategy and operations and tactics to it. And then problem solving is the implementation of one of those three strategies, or the sequence of all of them. Now, in practice, when you're working with these three problem-solving models, it's not just one and then the next one and then the other. In fact, when you start with complexity and chaos, you hypothesize a design that seems to make some sense, and then you pass that to the rational planning module or model, and you develop those detailed plans, and then you pass that to the tactical SOPs where you try to implement that. And then the feedback that you get from the results of each of these subordinate problem-solving models can go provide information back to the design thinking to determine if we have done a good job, or we are at a sufficient level of detail that we can actually have positive results. So the feedback is a form of learning that you get from trying to put your plan into action. So you do your best with design, come up with a plan, put it into practice, and then through this process of dynamic feedback from one level to another, we begin to learn, adapt, and synchronize our understanding with the way the world actually works. And when you have a world that is dynamic, that requires assessment and adaptation, when it's an open system with lots of variables that change, it's necessary to have all three of these problem-solving models working simultaneously through time. We use the acronym of VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, to describe the nature of this chaotic and complex world that we're trying to navigate. We can think of the amount of change of each iteration that we engage in as either being incremental or a transformative adaptation. It's the difference between evolution and revolution. If you think of the Toyota production system, essentially Toyota redesigns completely their cars every 4 years. And as soon as they complete one and hand that off to production, who engages in incremental improvements in each of the successive years, after the completion of that 4 year design, they start with a new fresh sheet of paper. They imagineer the technology that should be available 4 years from now, and then they redesign that car from scratch. So you have this continuous dual approach of transformative redesign, and then the evolutionary micro improvements that occurs from studying your process and applying the feedback. Main idea here is that we can do both of those things. We have to find a way to integrate them, and we really want to ensure that we're developing new ideas and systems before we need them. You don't want to be in that position of having to come up with a new idea under pressure. It's better to get out in front of that and design them before you need them. So now when we think about applying these systems thinking and strategic thinking ideas to the world of trading, we're looking at how we might make improvements for self, systems, and market. And these are some areas where systems thinking and strategic thinking can help. These are going to be the things that we talk about in the workshop this summer. Looking at systems thinking for the self as system, we can do parts analysis to see which elements of our inner theater are helping or hindering our trading performances, how we might enlist different aspects of our personality and our skill sets to improve our trading. We can do belief mining and exploration of our belief systems as an organic whole and go find the taproots of those core ideas, beliefs, and assumptions that are central to how we view the world. We can do analysis of those assumptions once they've been surfaced and identified and see where the implications lead us. We can look at ourself as a student, as a performer, as a manager, and then identify the steps in our processes that make this a dynamic learning environment, a performing environment, or a managerial environment, and see how each of those parts affects our trading. We can look at our trading process, our house of trading, if you will, and look for sources of support and conflict, and look at the dynamic relationships in that model to see what we can do to strengthen our foundations. We can take a look at our learning styles and our learning habits as a systemic approach to adapt to the world and find ways to improve our learning posture and our learning environment. We can look at the trader quality number as a way to assess the effect of our judgment and intuition upon mechanical rules to see under what circumstances it makes sense to apply discretion to rules-based systems. When we think about systems improvements with strategic or systems thinking, we can apply various techniques of process improvement that come from supply chain management, manufacturing, and statistical process control to find ways to use evidence and data to improve our performance. We can look at our trading repertoire as a system of systems and look at the processes we use for asset allocation. We can look at the cycle time of our decision making to see if that's appropriate given the market conditions and the systems that we're applying. We can look at the way we define criteria for filters and setups and exits and management. We can look at the method by which we use feedback to adapt and evolve our systems. We can look to see if we have redundant steps or non-value added steps. We can look at our portfolio strategy to see if we're properly diversified in time or diversified through targets or diversified through techniques to ensure that no matter what the market is doing, we have an appropriate response that makes sense within our larger meta system. We can take a look at decision-making process for setup conditions, the definitions of criteria to take action, and the level of commitment that is appropriate based on conditions and criteria. We can compare our values and our measurements to see if we are favoring efficiency versus effectiveness and find a way to reconcile that with our inner beliefs and with our objectives. Through the use of process maps, we can determine what steps in our system are adding value and where they may be optimized. When we apply systems thinking and strategic thinking to markets, we get into the business of market classification, how we describe them, how we may use them to forecast future probabilities, how we can anticipate moves of a certain magnitude depending on the conditions that we've identified in our classification system. We can look at the classification strategy as a way to define periods of normality or abnormality and use that to guide the way we select systems. We can look at the timeliness of our classification system to see if it's giving us actionable information in time. We can take a look at the stationarity of markets based on our classification system. How often do markets cycle through different phases as we have described them in our framework? Can we drill down from our market classification to find sectors or segments or pockets where subsets of the market are behaving in ways that align with our systems? We can take a look at which dimensions that we're measuring of the market and make justifications for those and look at the level of fidelity that we apply. So when we think about systems thinking and strategic thinking then, it's appropriate to look at all three of these domains, self, systems, and markets, and then finding ways to help integrate them into the sweet spot where all three are aligned so that we are able to trade the market with systems that are aligned with our beliefs and that we can execute as designed and which are appropriate for the kind of market that we're operating in. So just a few ideas about systems thinking, problem solving, strategic thinking, and then the application of these ideas to the different dimensions of our trading program. So thanks for your kind attention. Look forward to working with you this summer. Keep your risk measured and your powder dry.